Hi students, good morning. Harry Potter starting on page 96. It's the beginning of chapter 6 titled Talons and Tea Leaves. So where we are in the story is they just arrived at Hogwarts for the year, and on the train some Dementors came by and Harry had a very strong reaction to them. He fainted, got very sick, but the other kids didn't really, so we don't know what happened there yet. And they went up to the dormitories for the night. So this is their first night back at Hogwarts. And we also learned that Hagrid is a teacher this year. He's teaching a class about animals and creatures. So that's everything we've learned so far. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione entered the Great Hall for breakfast the next day, the first thing they saw was Draco Malfoy, who seemed to be entertaining a large group of Slytherins with a very funny story. As they passed, Malfoy did a ridiculous impression of a swooning fit, and there was a roar of laughter. Ignore him, said Hermione, who was right behind Harry. Just ignore him. It's not worth it. Hey, Potter! Shrieked Pansy Parkinson, a Slytherin girl with a face like a pug. Potter! The Dementors are coming! Potter! Ooh! Harry dropped into a seat at the Gryffindor table next to George Weasley. New third-year course schedules, said George, passing them over. What's up with you, Harry? Malfoy, said Ron, sitting down on George's other side and glaring over at the Slytherin table. George looked up in time to see Malfoy pretending to faint with terror again, making fun of Harry. That little git, he said calmly. He wasn't so cocky last night when the Dementors were down at our end of the train. Came running into our compartment, didn't he, Fred? Nearly wet himself, said Fred, with a contemptuous glance at Malfoy. I wasn't too happy myself, said George. They're horrible things, those Dementors. Sort of freeze your insides, don't they? Said Fred. You didn't pass out, though, did you? Said Harry in a low voice. Forget it, Harry, said George bracingly. Dad had to go out to Azkaban one time, remember, Fred? And he said it was the worst place he'd ever been. He came back all weak and shaking. They suck the happiness out of a place, Dementors. Most of the prisoners go mad in there. Anyway, we'll see how happy Malfoy looks after our first Quidditch match, said Fred. Gryffindor versus Slytherin, first game of the season, remember? The only time Harry and Malfoy had faced each other in a Quidditch match, Malfoy had definitely come off worse. Feeling slightly more cheerful, Harry helped himself to sausages and fried tomatoes. Hermione was examining her new class schedule. Oh, good, we're starting some new subjects today, she said happily. Hermione, said Ron, frowning as he looked over her shoulder. They've messed up your schedule. Look, they've got you down for about 10 subjects a day. There isn't enough time. I'll manage. I've fixed it all with Professor McGonagall. But look, said Ron, laughing. See this morning, 9 o'clock, divination, and underneath, 9 o'clock Muggle studies. And Ron leaned closer to the schedule, disbelieving. Look, underneath that, arithmancy, 9 o'clock. I mean, I know you're good, Hermione, but no one's that good. How are you supposed to be in 3 classes at once? Don't be silly, said Hermione shortly. Of course I won't be in 3 classes at once. Well then, pass the marmalade, said Hermione. But, oh Ron, what's it to you if my schedule's a bit full? Hermione snapped. I told you I fixed it all with Professor McGonagall. Just then Hagrid entered the great hall. He was wearing his long moleskin overcoat and was absent-mindedly swinging a dead polecat from one enormous hand. All right, he said eagerly, pausing on the way to the staff table. You're in my first ever lesson, right after lunch. Been up since 5 getting everything ready. Hope it's okay. Me, a teacher. Huh, honestly. He grinned broadly at them and headed off to the staff table, still swinging the polecat. Wonder what he's been getting ready, said Ron, a note of anxiety in his voice. The hall was starting to empty as people headed off toward their first lesson. Ron checked his course schedule. We'd better go look. Divination's at the top of North Tower. It'll take us 10 minutes to get there. They finished their breakfast hastily, said goodbye to Fred and George, and walked back through the hall. As they passed the Slytherin table, Malfoy did yet another impression of a fainting fit. The shouts of laughter followed Harry into the entrance hall. The journey through the castle to North Tower was a long one. 2 years at Hogwarts hadn't taught them everything about the castle, and they had never been inside North Tower before. There's got to be a shortcut, Ron panted as they climbed their 7th long staircase and emerged on an unfamiliar landing where there was nothing but a large painting of a bare stretch of grass hanging on the stone wall. I think it's this way, said Hermione, peering down the empty passage to the right. Can't be, said Ron. That's south. Look, you can see a bit of the lake out the window. Harry was watching and painting. Harry was watching the painting. A fat, dapple gray pony had just ambled onto the grass and was grazing nonchalantly. Harry was used to the subjects of Hogwarts paintings moving around and leaving their frames to visit one another, but he always enjoyed watching it. A moment later, a short, squat knight in a suit of armor clanked into the picture after his pony. By the look of the grass stains on his metal knees, he had just fallen off. "Aha!" he yelled, seeing Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "What villains are these that trespass upon my private lands? Come to scorn at my fall, perchance? Draw, you knaves, you dogs!" They watched in astonishment as the little knight tugged his sword out of its scabbard and began brandishing it violently, hopping up and down in rage. But the sword was too long for him. A particularly wild swing made him overbalance, and he landed face down in the grass. "Are you all right?" said Harry, moving closer to the picture. "Get back, you scurvy braggart! Back, you rogue!" The knight seized his sword again and used it to push himself back up, but the blade sank deeply into the grass, and though he pulled with all his might, he couldn't get it out again. Finally, he had to flop back down onto the grass and push up his visor to mop his sweating face. "Listen," said Harry, taking advantage of the knight's exhaustion. "We're looking for the North Tower. You don't know the way, do you?" "A quest!" The knight's rage seemed to vanish instantly. He clanked to his feet and shouted, "Come follow me, dear friends, and we shall find our goal, or else shall perish bravely in the charge." He gave the sword another fruitless tug, tried and failed to mount the fat pony, gave up, and cried, "On foot then, good sirs and gentle lady, on, on!" And he ran, clanking loudly, into the left side of the frame and out of sight. They hurried after him along the corridor, following the sound of his armor. Every now and then they spotted him running through a picture ahead. "Be of stout heart, the worst is yet to come," yelled the knight, and they saw him reappear in front of an alarmed group of women in crinolines, whose picture hung on the wall of a narrow spiral staircase. Puffing loudly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed the tightly spiraling steps, getting dizzier and dizzier, until at last they heard the murmur of voices above them and knew they had reached the classroom. "Farewell!" cried the knight, popping his head into a painting of some sinister-looking monks. "Farewell, my comrades in arms! If ever you have need of a noble heart and steely sinew, call upon Sir Cadogan." "Yeah, we'll call you," muttered Ron as the knight disappeared, "if we ever need someone mental." They climbed the last few steps and emerged onto a tiny landing, where most of the class was already assembled. There were no doors off this landing, but Ron nudged Harry and pointed at the ceiling, where there was a circular trapdoor with a brass plaque on it. "Sybil Trelawney, divination teacher," Harry read. "How are we supposed to get up there?" As though in answer to his question, the trapdoor suddenly opened, and a silvery ladder descended right at Harry's feet. Everyone got quiet. "After you," said Ron, grinning, so Harry climbed the ladder first. He emerged into the strangest-looking classroom he had ever seen. In fact, it didn't look like a classroom at all. More like a cross between someone's attic and an old-fashioned tea shop. At least 20 small circular tables were crammed inside it, all surrounded by chintz armchairs and fat little poufs. Everything was lit with a dim crimson light. The curtains at the windows were all closed, and the many lamps were draped with dark red scarves. It was stiflingly warm, and the fire that was burning under the crowded mantelpiece was giving off a heavy, sickly sort of perfume as it heated a large copper kettle. The shelves running around the circular walls were crammed with dusty-looking feathers, stubs of candles, many packs of tattered playing cards, countless silvery crystal balls, and a huge array of teacups. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder as the class assembled around them, all talking in whispers. "Where is she?" Ron said. A voice came suddenly out of the shadows, a soft, misty sort of voice. "Welcome," it said. "How nice to see you in the physical world at last." Harry's immediate impression was of a large, glittering insect. Professor Trelawney moved into the firelight, and they saw that she was very thin. Her large glasses magnified her eyes to several times their natural size, and she was draped in a gauzy, spangled shawl. Innumerable chains and beads hung around her spindly neck, and her arms and hands were encrusted with bangles and rings. "Sit, my children, sit," she said, and they all climbed awkwardly into armchairs or sank onto poufs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat themselves around the same round table. "Welcome to divination," said Professor Trelawney, who had seated herself in a winged armchair in front of the fire. "My name is Professor Trelawney. You may not have seen me before. I find that descending too often into the hustle and bustle of the main school clouds my inner eye." Nobody said anything to this extraordinary pronouncement. Professor Trelawney delicately rearranged her shawl and continued. "So you have chosen to study divination, the most difficult of all magical arts. I must warn you at the outset that if you do not have the sight, there is very little I will be able to teach you. Books can take you only so far in this field." At these words, both Harry and Ron glanced, grinning, at Hermione, who looked startled at the news that books wouldn't be much help in this subject. "Many witches and wizards, talented though they are in the area of loud bangs and smells and sudden disappearings, are yet unable to penetrate the veiled mysteries of the future," Professor Trelawney went on, her enormous gleaming eyes moving forward from her face to face. "It is a gift granted to few. You, boy," she said suddenly to Neville, who almost toppled off his poof. "Is your grandmother well?" Excuse me. "I think so," said Neville tremulously. "I wouldn't be so sure if I were you, dear," said Professor Trelawney, the firelight glinting on her long emerald earrings. Neville gulped. Professor Trelawney continued placidly. "We will be covering the basic methods of divination this year. The first term will be devoted to reading the tea leaves. Next term we shall progress to palmistry. By the way, my dear," she shot suddenly at Parvati Patel, "beware a red-haired man." Parvati gave a startled look at Ron, who was right behind her, and edged her chair away from him. "In the second term," Professor Trelawney went on, "we shall progress to the crystal ball, if we have finished with fire omens, that is. Unfortunately, classes will be disrupted in February by a nasty bout of the flu. I myself will lose my voice, and around Easter one of our number will leave us forever." A very tense silence followed this pronouncement, but Professor Trelawney seemed unaware of it. "I wonder, dear," she said to Lavender Brown, who was nearest and shrank back in her chair, "if you could pass me the largest silver teapot?" Lavender, looking relieved, stood up, took an enormous teapot from the shelf, and put it down on the table in front of Professor Trelawney. "Thank you, my dear. Incidentally, that thing you are dreading, it will happen on Friday, the 16th of October." Lavender trembled. "Now I want you all to divide into pairs. Collect a teacup from the shelf. Come to me and I will fill it. Then sit down and drink. Drink until only the dregs remain. Swill these around the cup 3 times with the left hand. Then turn the cup upside down on its saucer. Wait for the last of the tea to drain away, then give your cup to your partner to read. You will interpret the patterns using pages 5 and 6 of Unfogging the Future. I shall move among you, helping and instructing. Oh, and dear," she caught Neville by the arm as he made to stand up, "after you've broken your first cup, would you be so kind as to select one of the blue patterned ones? I'm rather attached to the pink ones." Sure enough, Neville had no sooner reached the shelf of teacups when there was a tinkle of breaking china. Professor Trelawney swept over to him, holding a dustpan and brush, and said, "One of the blue ones, then, dear, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you." When Harry and Ron had had their teacups filled, they went back to their table and tried to drink the scalding tea quickly. They swilled the dregs around as Professor Trelawney had instructed, then drained the cups and swapped over. "Right," said Ron, as they both opened their books at pages 5 and 6. "What can you see in mine?" "A load of soggy brown stuff," said Harry. The heavily perfumed smoke in the room was making him feel sleepy and stupid. "Broaden your minds, my dears, and allow your eyes to see past the mundane," Professor Trelawney cried through the gloom. Harry tried to pull himself together. "Right, you've got a crooked sort of cross?" He consulted Unfogging the Future. "That means you're going to have trials and suffering? Sorry about that, but there's a thing that could be the sun? Hang on. That means great happiness. So you're going to suffer but be very happy? You need your inner eye tested if you ask me," said Ron, and they both had to stifle their laughs as Professor Trelawney gazed in their direction. "My turn." Ron peered into Harry's teacup, his forehead wrinkled with effort. "There's a blob a bit like a bowler hat," he said. "Maybe you're going to work for the Ministry of Magic?" He turned the teacup the other way up. "But this way it looks more like an acorn?" "What's that?" he scanned his copy of Unfogging the Future. "A windfall, unexpected gold." Excellent. You can lend me some. And there's a thing here. He turned the cup again. That looks like an animal? Yeah, if that was on its head. It looks like a hippo. No, a sheep? Bye.